Good morning, Mr. Lewis. Thank you for coming in at short notice today to continue with your evidence. That's been a help to the inquiry's timetable. Ms. Thompson.
Good morning, Mr. Lewis.
Good morning.
You began your evidence on the 8th of February, and when we adjourned at the end of the day, I'd begun asking you questions about your visit to Caddy and Addie Johnston's house at 6:30 in the evening of the 4th of May.
Yes.
I'd asked you some questions about what you did to prepare for the meeting, and I'd like to ask you some questions now about the meeting itself. I wonder if it might be helpful to start by refreshing our memory of the entry in the flow log, given that your evidence was some time ago now. So the PIRC reference is 04150, you're a step ahead of me, and it's page 20 of the PDF. So here we are, Addie Johnston and family, personal contact, 1830 hours on the 4th of the 5th, 2015. Home visit as requested by Addie Johnston. Initially, this visit was as an introduction to Addie and to obtain a list of clothing required by the partner Colette, as the house still secured by Police Scotland. Myself and John Clarkin then subjected to intense questioning by a large contingent of the family. Occasionally hostile and frustrated about what Police Scotland had done or told the family differed from that of the PIRC. Eventually managed to speak to Addie at the front door and placate him and explain our role. He reiterated Amaranwar would be contact for the family. And if we can move on to the next page, please. Also obtained a list of clothing. Family requested a female officer recover articles from the house. Further explained Crown-directed role. Report to COPFS. I will continue to update the family. Maybe occasions I will not be able to answer questions as it may compromise any Crown decision. However, this is a very early stage of the inquiry and a significant amount of information and witness statements required to be obtained. And if we scroll to the bottom of the page, we'll see that it was written up at 1700 hours on the 5th of May 2015. You mentioned there a large contingent of the family. How many people were in the house?
I can't remember the exact number, but at least a dozen. Family and friends, I think it was more than all family.
Was Colette Bell there, do you recall?
Yes.
You say that the family and friends potentially were hostile and frustrated about what Police Scotland had done or told the family differed from that of the PIRC. What had Police Scotland told the family that differed from what the PIRC were now telling them?
I think it was there was a general difference to the family, quite understandably frustrated about the different versions of events of what had happened to Sheku from the police officers, from Gary McEwen, and how that differed and how had that happened, which was part of our inquiry from the very outset.
I wonder if we can go to your second inquiry statement and look at paragraph 80 of that. You say in your inquiry statement, that is why we are there, to take these questions, to take that sort of frustration and report it back to the investigation. It was quite clear from that home visit the family and friends had been there when different messages had been delivered, different information had been provided by different people from Police Scotland, and was understandably causing them a high level of anger, frustration and hostility. I needed to feed that back into the investigation, and on that occasion it was going to be Billy Little, specifically about the house. I gather there was an issue in relation to scene management of the house too. I asked Billy, unless there is something that you or Police Scotland can tell me, can we get this house back sooner rather than later, or get it released from Police Scotland's scene management, which we achieved. So if we could scroll back up to the beginning of that paragraph, please. You mentioned there the need to feed the concerns back into the investigation. So what exactly was the issue that you needed to feed back into the investigation?
The family's frustration about different messages and the house itself Think from memory, Addie had been told by Gary McEwen that we had control of the house, when in actual fact it was Police Scotland that had control of the house. So I had Addie's version of events, and it was something I'd been given prior to meeting the family, so I had to clarify that, and I was concerned that I had missed something from the briefing that I had received. So it was important, I felt, to get back to feed that back into Billy and to ascertain just exactly, was I wrong, had I been given the wrong information, and to get that resolved sooner rather than later, because it was clearly, from Colette's point of view, for personal items she required for young, it was important they got back into the house. So if I could achieve that, I saw that as a priority for the family.
So there were two separate issues then. There were the different versions of events
Yes.
that had been provided, and then some confusion around who was responsible for
Yes.
scene management
Yes.
and who had control of the house.
Yes.
So what then did you feed back into the investigation?
Speaking to Billy, I went back to Kirkcaldy Police Office and spoke to Billy Little. I clarified the situation and asked for him to, I think he was either in a meeting or about to go into a meeting, can't remember exactly, with senior officers within Police Scotland. And as I said, if we can get the house back, I think it would have been a major step forward from the family's point of view.
I think we'll see as we go through the log that you succeeded in having the house returned to the
Yes.
family that evening. But leaving the issue around control of the house and scene management of the house to one side and returning to the concerns that were expressed around different versions of events being provided to the family, what did you feed back into the investigation in relation to those concerns?
It was the frustration from the family, understandably. Bear in mind we're dealing with a family who are experiencing, I think there's a traumatic situation is an understatement. But to get that information back to clarify what's going on, obviously it's first contact, and it is an introduction as to my role and what I will be able to provide as a support mechanism and manage that information between ourselves and the family. So I knew about the different messages. I can't remember the detail of that, but I know it is recorded as a result of the investigation. And how did that come about? And that frustration was quite clearly significant for the family. So I saw that as a major priority to get it resolved.
Okay. And who did you feed that back to?
That was back to Billy again.
Do you know what steps were taken to resolve that issue?
He went into the meeting and he came back out, and it was, as you said, we managed to secure to get the house back to the family, albeit it was later that night.
Sorry, I'm less concerned about the house and more interested to know what was done to resolve the family's concerns that they've been given different versions of events.
Oh, again, that was part of ours. I said to Addie at the time, that was part of our investigation. How did they manage, how did Police Scotland deliver so many different messages to cause frustration to the family? So we were aware of that, and that was part of the process. How did that happen? And we did, throughout the investigation, clarify that.
How did you go about that task of clarifying these different messages that had been provided?
It was as the investigation progressed, obtaining statements from the family to clarify it, from the officers involved in delivering those messages.
Can we look at paragraph 81 of your statement, please? I've been asked in a situation like this, where there were frustrations caused by differences in what the family had been told, if the flow log would be used to note details of what those differences were. The main concern for the family was at that time the different messages that were being given, but also the return of the house, Colette's house, for them to get access to it. I knew, bearing in mind this was our first contact with the family, I knew we would be coming back at some point very soon to get a statement, so I wouldn't go into any great detail within the flow log, because I knew I was coming back, and having been aware of that, that's information that you feed back, and we had a major incident room running from the very outset. It's for me to feed that information back into the morning briefings, into the organisation, and then when I went to speak to Addie, he was able to highlight the information, the same as Caddy as well. as to what they had been told, and we would have spoken to Colette and her mother Lorraine. All this information was repeated by all of them as to what they had been told, different accounts of it. I would not go into the detail of that because I knew I'd be going back to speak to them to get a full statement. I'm wondering how you were able to feed back their initial concerns or concerns expressed to you initially if you didn't make a note of what those concerns were at the time.
So it was a verbal update, going straight back to, I effectively left the house, the family home, and went straight back to Kirkcaldy Police Office, so it was fresh in my mind. There was nothing to, felt to write down at that time, because it was quite clear what the frustrations were the family had in relation to messages that had been delivered by Police Scotland.
And you say in your statement, I would not go into the detail of that because I knew I would be going back to speak to them to get a full statement.
Yes.
So I want to ask you some questions about that, and I wonder if we can look at the statement that was taken from Colette Bell. It's PIRC 00028. Taken by John Clarkin, but in your presence. And I'd like us just to scroll through this quite quickly. We see it was taken on the 8th of May, 3:15, by John Clarkin in your presence. And if we scroll down, there's some, if we can stop these, and I need us to go through each paragraph, but quite quickly. In the first paragraph, there's some background information. She goes on to say in the second paragraph that she previously provided a statement to officers on the 3rd of May. She says, there are a number of matters I now wish to make clear. These matters relate to inaccuracies that I've observed in the police statement. These matters are listed as follows. Carrying on from there, there's a paragraph about a boxing match, and the next paragraph is about knives in the cutlery drawer. Then there's a paragraph about fridge magnets, and a paragraph about contact with her mother. She then moves on to talk about contact with the officers on the 3rd of May. And then beneath that, there's information about Sheko attending the gym. And if we carry on a little further, she says, I now wish to confirm some further points to PIRC. Sheko is a Muslim. I would not describe him as a strict Muslim. It might be fair to say he had his own way. However, I do know that he did pray each day. He was not concerned that I was non-Muslim, but he did wash in preparation of prayer. It is fair to say that he took his prayers quite seriously. So if we can just stay with this paragraph just for a moment. You weren't the lead interviewing officer here, but you were present when this statement was taken. Why was it thought relevant, as at the 8th of May, to ask Colette about Sheko's religion?
No, we didn't ask. She confirmed. She wanted to confirm some further points to us.
She wanted to confirm
Yes.
that to you. All right. So she volunteered that
Yeah,
information
yeah.
unprompted. Okay. In the next paragraph down, we see John Clarkin has asked questions about drink and drugs. And then the paragraph beyond that again is about drugs and smoking. And if we keep going, she describes Sheko as a family man who enjoyed the company of friends and family members, and she lists some of his interests. And then beneath that, there's a paragraph about them being in a mixed race relationship. If we carry on, please. There's a paragraph concerning Sheko's views towards the police. And then Colette goes on to talk about feeling numb, and nothing makes sense to her. And then she read over her statement and signed her statement. So it appears that there's nothing at all in her statement about the different accounts that were provided to her.
Well, I would need to see the statements from the officers, but I think we already had that information from the officers as to what their account had been given to the family, so that was already there.
But was it not important to get Colette's version of what she had been told?
I think, well, having been covered, and she has volunteered information in relation to that, so it was covered without going back over the detail of it, as it was apparently, well, my information was we already had that information about it.
But it's not covered in her statement?
No, it's not.
And you appreciated, I think, when you met with the family at the Johnsons' home address, that the different versions of events were causing anger and frustration
Yes.
to the family. And you'd said in your statement that it had been your intention to speak with the family members. You said you would speak to Addie and Caddy, and we would also speak to Colette. And that's why you didn't make a note in the flow log at the time.
Yes.
And I'm just interested to know why, a few days later, when you and Mr. Clarkin did speak with Colette, this issue doesn't appear to have been canvassed with her.
So from memory, it was already recorded in different statements, so as you say, maybe it would have been better to include it again in her statement. But my understanding was that that had already been covered in a previous statement. So we had that record of information, and this was more about her thoughts and her frustrations with what had happened.
So your understanding is that Colette had already given a statement in relation to the different versions of events? that
Yes,
had
I
been
think she'd
provided?
already given a statement to the police prior to our involvement on Sunday, I think.
I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but so far as I'm aware, the only statement that she gave prior to the statement that you took from her on the 8th was the statement that she provided to DCs Mitchell and Parker on the 3rd.
Yeah, I think that's the statement she provided. That's the statement I'm aware of.
That statement was given immediately after she was provided with the death message,
Yes.
and before she'd later made her way to Caddy and Addie Johnson's home address, which was the point in time that the officers returned and gave further information. And later on, Gary McEwen attended the address
Yes,
and gave
that's right,
further
yeah.
information.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
So of the different versions of events that may have been provided to Colette Bell, she'd only received one such version of events at the point in time that she gave her statement on the 3rd of May. And at the point of giving that statement, there was no competing or conflicting information available to her.
I take that on board. My understanding was that she had given a statement prior to us, so that's why we were back up to take our or get our statement from her.
Okay, and what did you do to check whether these points had all been adequately addressed in her earlier statement?
I personally wouldn't have done it because John was dealing with that one, so he would have looked at the information in relation to that, and that was him dealing with that statement.
And looking back, do you think it might be better if that check had been made?
Now that you say that that information wasn't included in their first statement, yes, it would have been better to have more information surrounding that to clarify the family's frustration.
I mean, the information couldn't have been included in her first statement because her first statement was noted before the subsequent versions of events were provided
Yeah,
to her.
I appreciate what you're saying. My recollection was we had that information, so but obviously you've clarified for me that we didn't have all that information. So yeah, it would have been better to have clarified more of that information in the statement that myself and John obtained.
Can we look at a subsequent statement that you noted from Colette Bell? This is PIRC 00029. And this was noted sometime later on the 6th of July of 2015, noted by yourself and investigator Karen. If we can scroll down, please. It's a very short statement. Essentially, you showed her 3 knives, and she identified the knives as coming from her home in Arran Crescent, and she signed labels of identification for the 3 knives. Can I pause just to ask why she wasn't shown the knife that was recovered from Hayfield Road?
I don't know, to be honest. I vaguely remember us going back up with Victoria with those knives. I don't know. I can't remember, to be honest, why we didn't have that. I don't know. No, I can't recollect why we didn't have the knife alleged to be carried by Sheku.
You would have been interested to know, I imagine, whether the knife that was recovered from Hayfield Road was a knife that had come from Colette's kitchen in
Yes.
Arran Crescent.
I think that's why we went back up. sure the knives were from the home address, and it was to clarify if they were basically where those 3 knives from the house, which she did belong to. She said did belong to herself and Cheku.
Yeah, well, those were knives that had been seized from her house
Yes.
by the
Yeah.
police. So it's perhaps unsurprising that she was able to confirm that they were her knives.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know why the opportunity wasn't taken to show her the knife that had been recovered from Hayfield Road, to give her the opportunity to
Yeah.
tell you whether or not it had also come from her house.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I can't remember how this action came about. It was an action that came out from the incident room, so to go back up and do that, it may well have been beneficial to have had the other knife as well as a comparison.
Okay. If we return to the statement, I think that's the end of it, but if we can just ensure that there's nothing further. That is indeed the end of the statement. So this is a second statement noted by the PIRC from Colette Bell, and again, there's nothing in here about the different versions of events that were provided to her. Is there?
No. No.
You also noted statements from both Addy and Caddy Johnson. I don't think we need to go to them, but Mr. Johnson's statement is PIRC 00106, and you took that statement on the 13th of May. And there is detail in his statement about the different versions of events that were provided to him. Do you remember taking that detail from him?
I remember being there, yes, and taking the statement.
Yeah. And Caddy Johnson's statement is PIRC 00252. It was noted on the 6th of June, so that's over a month later. And again, the different versions of events that she had heard are covered in some detail in that statement. Do you remember taking that statement to and covering that detail with her? Okay, so Addy's statement was noted on the 13th of May, Colette's on the 6th of June, and the different versions of events were covered in those statements. But as we've discussed, there's nothing in the statements that the PIRC took from Colette Bell. And I wonder, looking back, whether it might have assisted you in feeding back the family's concerns if you'd made a record of Colette's concerns to feed back?
Yeah, probably. I mean, every statement that's taken, we had is it's been described as a major incident room running, so all statements go back into the major incident room, and there are people within that room who their job is to look through statements and read through statements, and if there's anything comes out and needs clarification, again that comes back out and we'd be action to go back and speak to witnesses to obtain that additional information.
Okay, yes, we've heard a little bit about how that process worked, but I'm simply wondering whether it might have assisted you in updating the SIO as to the nature of the family's concerns, which you'd assured the family were going to be investigated by the PIRC, if you had made a note of what Colette's concerns were.
I think that from the sort of first contact with the family, it was quite clear what their frustrations were, and I said I'd fed that back in verbally to the incident and at briefings. It's daily briefings we had throughout the investigation. That was part of my role to highlight that, so it is getting noted. Me physically making a note of it, no I didn't, because as I said, I'm almost immediately reiterating the concerns, and it was quite clear what their concerns were. So was it fed back into investigation? Yes, it was. Verbally, was it recorded? Yes, it was. Did I note it down in my flow log at that time? No, I didn't. It may well have been beneficial to do that, but the information was fed back into the SIO and the investigation team as a whole.
Okay, and what was done to investigate the concerns?
Again, going back to the statements, going back to see the family to get these statements as early as possible.
Returning to the meeting on the 4th, I wonder if we can bring up the flow log again, please. I think it was page 20 of the PDF. If we can scroll to the bottom of that first page, please. If we can stop there, thank you. Eventually managed to speak to Addy at the front door and placate him and explain our role. He reiterated, Amar Anwar would be the contact for the family. Now, previously, in the log entries that we looked at on the 8th of February, Amar Anwar was deemed to be acting on behalf of the family, and here he is, the contact for the family. Had something changed, or is it just saying the same thing in different words?
No, I mean, it was made quite clear. Well, I made contact with Adi. He was obviously consulting with Mr Anwar, which was fully respected, and that's what Adi said, that Mr Anwar would be the contact for the family, effectively the single point of contact, and that was reiterated several times throughout the investigation.
You also say here, eventually managed to speak to Adi at the front door and placate him and explain our role. And you'd mentioned earlier in this entry that there was a large contingent of the family there, and there was hostility and frustration. And I'm wondering whether it might have occurred to you, perhaps for cultural reasons, that families from Sierra Leone may not draw the same distinction between immediate and extended family as perhaps you or I might, and whether you had made any attempts to speak with the wider grouping of people who were present, rather than simply trying to take Adi aside and speaking to him at the front door.
It wasn't a case of taking Adi aside. That was me speaking to Adi as I was going back out the doors. There were, as I said, it was intense questioning, quite understandably. Lots of questions to be answered, lots of questions being asked by, or the same question being asked by different people. And the same sort of answer was that that's part of our investigation. We have to report it or investigate it and report it to the Crown Office. So I was answering questions, and as was John, throughout our time there. As I say, when I spoke to Adi, that was us simply going to the door, having spoken to the family, and as I say, the personal issues that they required for the return of the house was clearly an issue that required urgent attention, and that was me speaking to, as I say, speaking to him as we went back to the front door. It wasn't a case of I took him aside. I had addressed their concerns and I understood their concerns, and it was a priority for me to get back to speak to Bill Little, who I knew by that time was at Kirkcaldy Police Office. So
had you listened to the concerns that were being expressed by the wider group, the extended family and friends?
Oh, I did. I wasn't. No, there was no under no circumstances was I ignoring everybody, but I did my best to answer as many questions as I possibly could, and then it was quite, as I say, it was quite clear that the retention of the house, the family home, was a major concern. So I wanted to resolve that, as we did do, but I knew that was going to take time, and I had to sort of push that on.
At the time that you visited Caddy and Adi Johnson's home, were you aware that the family were a Muslim family?
Yes.
I wonder if we can flip back to your inquiry statement, the second statement, paragraph 89, please. I've been asked if my learning at some point relatively early on that Shekubaya was Muslim impacted my actions at all in the early stages of the investigation. Not at that time. I think it was actually Amar Ammar who had asked the question to confirm about Sheku being Muslim, and I think as part of that conversation he confirmed to me that he was not a practicing Muslim. What would be the relevance to you of Sheku not being a practicing Muslim?
Simply, it's a lifestyle question. I've liaised with many families from many different religious backgrounds, and I'm not going to sit here and make it quite clear to all families I deal with regarding their religious background. I am no expert in all religions, and I make it quite clear that if I do inadvertently cause any offence, I would ask that they highlight that to me, because then I will learn from it. And over 30 years within the police and 11 years with the PIRC and a family liaison officer for the vast majority of that. There is always a learning outcome speaking with any no matter what their background is, you will always learn something for moving on to the next job. So as I say, I'm no expert on religion, but I will do my very best to respect anybody's religion. And as I said, if I cause offence, it's certainly not intentional, and I would ask any family member to express and educate me, if for want of a better word.
Mm-hmm. I think you say much the same thing in paragraph 53 of your statement. Maybe we can look at that for completeness. There's discussion there about a briefing, and you go on to say, I explained to him I had many years of experience of dealing with or liaising with families from all sorts of backgrounds, race, religion, gender. I knew exactly what he was talking about because of the circumstances, and I think I knew by that time that Sheikha was a Muslim, and it was a case of, is he a practicing Muslim? I was already assessing what sort of information do I need to have in order to assist in relation to that as far as liaising is concerned with the family. Whilst he did highlight that, I had been thinking about that from the very moment I was appointed as the FLO. In the past, I've had to go to a member of the community and get advice from them. I am no expert on religion, but I like to think I have a working knowledge of the information that I require for such deployments. I do my very best to make it quite clear to anybody when I am liaising with families that I am no expert, so if I do cause some sort of offence, I expect them to highlight it to me so that I can learn from that. To date, I have never caused any offence. I have had the experience to liaise with families in an appropriate manner. In very basic terms, my policy has always been speak to people in a manner which I expect to be spoken to myself, and it stood me in good stead for liaising with families. So that's essentially what you said in your evidence a moment or so ago. And if we can perhaps keep this on the screen for now, so I'd like to ask you a few questions. What account did you take of possible cultural or religious requirements when you went to meet with the family?
Again, it's very much working on experience and knowledge of past deployments, both as within the PIRC and within the police. And if something was pointed out to me to respect that religion, then I would comply with it. I have no issues in relation to that. And it's trying to understand their beliefs. I have experience of repatriating deceased to their home country, and I've got experience in relation to that as well. So I call on all that experience on any deployment as to how I can use that, or do I need to go and seek advice from a community leader, from anybody within that community, irrespective of who it is, to assist with supporting the family, and that's part of my role.
Okay. When you went to the family home, did you take your shoes off when you went in?
I didn't know.
No. And did you check whether the female family members would feel comfortable with a male investigator coming into the house?
I didn't know, and certainly when I arrived at the doors, I was invited in by Addy, so there was nothing. Had it been, had that been expressed to me that I had to respect that, then that would not have been an issue.
Okay.
I've done it in the past, so why would I not do it now?
Mm. And you say that in your statement here that your policy is to speak to people in a manner in which you would expect to be spoken to yourself. Is that maybe the same as treating other people the way that you would expect to be treated yourself?
It's treating people with respect and respecting their religion, whatever their beliefs are. It's not my beliefs, it's I'm respecting their beliefs.
So does your approach take account of cultural and religious differences that perhaps don't apply to you?
Oh, very much so. You have to keep an open mind. It's not for me to dictate my beliefs to anybody. It's my job to provide a support to the family, irrespective of the background, irrespective of their beliefs, their genders, or whatever the circumstances are.
Now, by the time you visited the family at 6:30 on the evening of the 4th, the postmortem had taken place.
Yes.
And you explain in your statement that there was no discussion about the postmortem at the meeting. I wonder if we can look at paragraph 86. I've been asked if, at this meeting with the family, John Clarkin or I discussed the post-mortem with the family and informed them it had taken place. No, I do not remember having a discussion about the post-mortem, because Amar Anwar was the single point of contact, so he had been told about it, albeit the meeting was shortly after. We had about half an hour or 45 minutes after we spoke to Amar about the post-mortem results. As he was the single point of contact, I would have expected him to inform the family of the post-mortem result. I want to ask you some questions about that. We looked at the entry when you gave your evidence on the 8th of February, and you had called Amar Anwar at 17:48 hours to advise him of the outcome of the post-mortem. So that's less than 45 minutes before you met with the family. And we agreed on the 8th of February that this was a call that was being made out with business hours, and you told us too that he had his children with him.
Yes.
Do you know where in Scotland Amar Anwar lives and works?
I knew where he worked at that time. I don't know where he lives, no.
Okay. Where did he work at that time?
Carlton Place, I think, in Glasgow.
In Glasgow, okay. And of course the family were based in Kirkcaldy.
Yes.
Yes. In your experience as a flow, is there some information that's better passed on face-to-face than on the telephone?
Yes.
Yeah, and might the results of an autopsy fall into that category?
Yes, it probably would be. It depends, if there's the importance of knowing that knowledge can sometimes it has to be delivered by phone. Is it ideal? I'd say probably not, but that's the whole point of a single point of contact and cascading that information. So, has it happened in the past? Yes, it has. Is it ideal? No, I wouldn't say it's ideal.
And so all things being equal, it's the sort of information that it might be better to pass on face-to-face if possible.
If possible, yes.
And if it was the sort of information that had to be passed on by phone, you might want some privacy. I think you gave evidence that you stepped into the yard at Kirkcaldy Police Station so that you could make a private call to Amar Anwar. And it might be difficult to make a private call if you're looking after children at the same time. And it's certainly a person who's sharing the results of a post-mortem examination over the telephone wouldn't want to be interrupted by their children. Would that be fair?
Well, that'd be a decision for Mr. Anwar, but yes, I would agree with that. I'd be looking to find some form of privacy, yes.
When you spoke with Mr. Anwar at 17:48 hours, did you ask him whether he would have the opportunity to pass the information to the family ahead of your visit at 6:30?
I don't remember asking that specific question, no.
Because if I recall well, and we looked at this last time, before the call at 17:48, at around about 5:30 in the afternoon, you'd made a courtesy call to Mr. Anwar to let him know that the family meeting was going to happen at 6:30.
Yes.
Did it occur to you that he might not have that opportunity before 6:30?
No, I stand to be corrected, but did Mr. Anwar had I not told him the result of the post-mortem prior to that? Was it not earlier in the day?
Let's have a look at the log so that we can be absolutely sure about this. Can we look, please, at what is stamped as page 12? I don't have the PDF number for it, but there are numbers in the top right-hand corner. Thank you. So here's an entry, 15:45 hours on the 4th. Telephone Addie Johnson to confirm I had received contact details for Amar Anwar. Addie requested a home visit at 18:30 hours. Agreed, no issue. So at 15:45 hours, that meeting was set up. If we go on to the next entry, please. 17:29, courtesy call to advise Amar of home visit, no issues. So you made Mr. Amar aware just before 5:30 that you were going to be visiting the family. Did you tell him what time you'd be visiting the family?
I think I did. I don't see any reason why I wouldn't do it, because Addy had suggested that time, so.
Okay. And then the next entry, we've looked at this before, but just to orientate ourselves, this is the entry 1748, advised Amar Anwar of the results of the post-mortem. So by the time you had the call with Mr. Anwar about the results of the post-mortem, he knew that you were going to be meeting with the family
Yes.
in about 45 minutes' time. And we can take that down from the screen just now. I'm wondering whether it occurred to you to check with Amar Anwar, either during your call at 1748 or perhaps even when you arrived at the Johnson's house before you got out of the car, just to pick up the phone and check with him whether he'd been able to convey that information to the family.
No, it didn't at that time. It was because he was the point of contact. It was important to relay the information to him. He didn't come back with any issues in relation to that. So, yeah, but from a hindsight point of view and looking for clarification, would have been beneficial to clarify that. It probably would have been.
You say that Amar Anwar was the single point of contact. Can you help me to understand, if he is the single point of contact, why were you going to visit the family at all? If all communications were routed through him, how does that fit with you then going to have a meeting with the family?
Again, it's a single point of contact is to manage the information to and between the investigation and the family. So, again, from experience, families have nominated in the past to have a solicitor as their single point of contact, but the family still want to speak to the family liaison officer. So you can still have a single point of contact, but if any member of the family had phoned me about any issues at all throughout the whole investigation, I simply wouldn't say, well, you need to go and speak to Mr. Anwar. If I could answer their question there and then, I would, which is one of the sort of the basic parameters you set out from the very outset. If I can answer the question, I will answer that question. However, there will always be circumstances where I can't answer it in order to, for the sake of discussion, to protect the integrity of the investigation. So, yes, Mr. Anwar was identified as being the single point of contact, and that was the case throughout the whole investigation. But I'm a family liaison officer, and I've been there where families want nothing to do with the family liaison. You introduce yourself, come back and tell me when the investigation's complete, and then the thereafter follows days and days of telephone calls and communication. It's not for me. It's not. I am there as a support role, an investigator first and foremost. Any member of the family had phoned me if I could answer the question to relieve their frustration or their concerns. I would answer that question, irrespective of their solicitor was the single point of contact. It is a title, and it is a conduit of providing information between two parties, and it's important that that single point of contact cascades the information to the family, and vice versa, for me to do it verbally or by written back into investigation.
Okay, so the single point of contact is a conduit, but that wouldn't prevent you from having direct contact with the family, particularly where that contact has been requested by the family, as it was here.
Yeah, I mean, these, again, it's contact through a solicitor is, I would suggest, an indirect form of communication. You will never beat direct communication with a family, and as I say, families have made it quite clear the solicitor will deal with it. And then from experience, not only my experience, but speaking to people who I know have been involved with the Hillsborough inquiry, have experienced the exact same thing. Families want to speak to their family liaison officer, but solicitors have said no, and vice versa. Solicitors have been contacted and will speak to the family. So it's a changing situation all the time, daily, hourly, and it's not for me to say, well, I'm not speaking to you because it's through your solicitor. That's just not appropriate.
I wasn't suggesting that you shouldn't have had the meeting. I was just keen to understand.
Yeah, and
why.
that's it's a support, and you're investigated first and foremost, I've already said, but you're there as a support role. I'm not a counsellor, I don't have any experience in that whatsoever, but I do have contacts, and any experienced flow will have contacts to assist the family in these situations, and it is about networking with your colleagues and those people who can help the family.
At the meeting with the family, did they ask you any questions about the post-mortem results?
No.
No. Did that not strike you as surprising if they had been told the results of the post-mortem in the previous half hour or 45 minutes, that they wouldn't have any questions for you?
I don't know if I'd say it was surprising. It was, the concern again was about the house and the different versions of events that the families had been given by Police Scotland. So looking back on it now, maybe I would have expected some questions about it, but there was no questions about it.
I just wondered if the lack of questions caused you to reflect on whether they knew about the post-mortem results.
Now that you mention it, you should never assume that information has been passed, and there's always a clarification. And as we've already discussed, could I have clarified with Mr. Anmar that he will pass on that information to the family? Yes, I probably could have done. But my experience is that having discussed the parameters of, and you won't pass on that information, yes, I think it becomes, unless I had concerns about that information not being passed on, I would ask on a regular basis, and have you passed on that information to the family, irrespective of whether it's a solicitor or somebody within the family itself.
And you've made it clear that you had an expectation that Mr. Anmar would pass that information on, but I think you've also accepted that there wasn't any discussion with him around whether he would have that opportunity before 6:30 in the afternoon. Can I read to you an extract from the evidence that Billy Little gave on the 9th of February? Am I correct in understanding your expectation was that the family would be told about this? That's the post-mortem results. Yes, absolutely. By Mr. Lewis? My expectation was the family would be told by the family solicitor. By the solicitor, and perhaps did you expect Mr. Lewis would speak to them when he visited them? Yes, absolutely. Because he was visiting them, and he did visit them. And we've heard this was a face-to-face visit. Yes. So you would have expected two sources of information, two people providing information to the family. Yes. So clearly, Mr. Little anticipated that because you were going to meet with the family face-to-face, then notwithstanding the fact that you'd shared the post-mortem results with Mr. Anwar, you would discuss the post-mortem results with the family. I just wanted to invite your comment on his evidence.
I understand what you're saying, but again, if you have multiple points of contact within any family, that can cause more frustration. So I've identified, and the family have identified Mr. Anmar as being that point of contact. And as we've discussed, could I have clarified to make sure he was going to do it? Then yes, I probably could have done. And that would have clarified, and I would have expected him very much so to be that point of contact or provide that information. If I was then asked questions by the family in relation to that, then I would have answered it. And there were no questions, but again, had there been questions, I would have answered that to the best of my ability.
Can we go back to the family liaison policy, please? And to page 26 of the PDF. If we scroll down to the section, that's perfect, thank you. Retention of organs and release of body. At the conclusion of the post-mortem, the flow should establish which tissues and/or organs or other samples have been retained for further pathological examination and the reasons for their retention. Flows should be prepared to discuss these issues with the family following prior discussion on such matters with the SI. So I wanted to ask, prior to your meeting with the family at 6:30 on the 4th, what steps did you take to establish which organs or tissues had been retained?
I hadn't at that time. It was information that had been provided to me by Billy. I think it was unascertained pending toxicology. The actual what had been retained or what had been taken, I hadn't clarified at that time.
Why didn't you clarify that with Billy Little?
I can't remember, to be honest. At that time, it's the samples that were taken. I can't remember if it was discussed at the time, but in relation to that, it's not a case. It wouldn't be a case of just ignoring it. It would be something that would be established later on, and for further discussion, as we did have with the family meetings with Mr. Anmar.
But the autopsy had taken place by this point in time, and so any
Yes.
samples that were going to be taken or any organs that were going to be retained would have been taken or retained by
Yes.
this point in time. And you were about to go off and have a meeting with the family at 6:30. In the event, no questions were raised by the family, and nor did you raise the subject of the post-mortem, but you must have anticipated the possibility of that topic coming up.
Yes, but I think I need to understand. It's you're managing the information to the family. Would I go into the great detail of everything that had happened up to then? It'd be something that I would assess in every situation. So you're controlling or managing how that information is being delivered to the family. I would rather sit down at a later date and discuss that with the family, which I think we did in due course with Mr. Anmar. So it's establishing that meeting on that day was first contact. It was an introduction. I've been there before with staff or with colleagues, both in the police and within the PIRC, and the whole judicial process. Somebody's tried to explain the whole judicial process to the family. That's not the appropriate time. That's information overload, and you can see them glazing over as to what you're saying to me. So it's managing that information to the family at a specific time. Have I ignored that? No, I haven't ignored it. It's a case of, here I am, my name's Alistair Lewis, here's my contact details, this is what we're hearing, I hear your frustration, I understand your hostility, the emotions, etc. It's my job to get back and get that moving forward, and then have a situation where you can sit down with the family and discuss and manage that information in the appropriate manner.
So this is a first contact with
Yes.
the family, but this first contact is taking place hours after the conclusion of the post-mortem.
Yes.
And so far as you were concerned, you'd provided the post-mortem results to the family's single point of contact, their solicitor,
Yes.
and you must have anticipated that that information would have been provided to the family, shared with the family, cascaded, as you put it, in advance of your meeting with the family at 6:30. And you must have anticipated that questions
Yes.
may have been asked. And the family liaison policy does make clear that it's the role of the flow to establish which tissues or organs have been retained and to be prepared to discuss these issues with the family. So I'm wondering where you would have found yourself if the family had asked you questions around the post-mortem and had asked you whether any organs had been retained.
Yeah, there would have been. When you meet the family, you don't have all the answers all the time. And yes, I could have, as you say, I could have, looking back, I could have got more information in relation to that. Would it have been the appropriate time to discuss that at that time with emotions running high? I'm not convinced, but we'll never know because it was never discussed. Have I ignored it? No, I wouldn't have ignored it. I would have got more information. And I'm sure over the course, as I said, we did get more information, and that information was passed to the family.
And it might be said that it's a matter for the family. You
Yeah.
go at their pace. If they're asking for the information, then the information should be provided when they ask for it, and not at a time that you deem to be more in their interest.
I'm not deeming any information to be in my interest. It would be a case of, but it was straightforward. I don't have that information, but I'll go and get it. I'll go and clarify that. And that would have been probably just a case of going back down to speak to Billy and getting that information. So could I have got it on the night had the questions been asked? Yes. Could I have gone back up and delivered it that night? Yes. And It wouldn't be a case of, I hear your questions, but I'm going to ignore it. I hear your questions, and I'm going to go and get the answer for it.
I'm just wondering whether, with hindsight, it might be helpful if you'd armed yourself with that information in advance of the meeting, although I acknowledge that the issue didn't arise at the meeting in any event.
Again, you can get as much detail as you want. How do you manage that information? You have to manage the information overload. Throughout any deployment, you will have families will say, I didn't tell you that. Well, yes, I did, and you can take them back and remind them when it happened. So it's not for one of the piece of advice we give to any family is to try and have a notepad and a pen invariably beside the bed, because you'll wake up in the middle of the night with a question and you'll forget about it by the morning, and to write that question down and then ask it for us the next day or whenever we next meet. So it's always about managing the expectations of the family and managing the information, and not to overload the family with information, not to ignore it, but to manage it and get that information to them so that they understand exactly where we are. It's very easy to sit, and people like ourselves who are involved in the judicial programme or the judicial system and have that knowledge, but these, the vast majority of families you deal with have no expectation or no understanding of how that system works. So to sit down on day one and say, this is how it's going to work and this is how long it's going to take, it just doesn't work. So you have to manage that delivery of information.
Now, your evidence is that you didn't raise the issue of the findings at post-mortem with the family because you'd shared the findings with Amar Anwar, and you had the expectation that he, as single point of contact, would cascade that information. You didn't know, as at the evening of the 4th, what tissues or organs had been retained. So can we take it that you didn't provide that information to Amar Anwar either?
No, I gave him the basic information that had been provided by Billy.
Do you know now what tissue samples were retained?
Not off the top of my head, no. It'll be recorded somewhere.
And do you know now whether any organs were retained?
I can't remember.
If I were to tell you that the post-mortem report records that the brain and cervical spinal cord were retained in their entirety, does that come as news to you?
It does, yes.
And if I were to tell you that the post-mortem report records that a number of tissue samples were retained, including heart, lung, liver, and kidneys, does that come as a surprise to you?
It does, yes.
Is that the sort of information that, if discovered by a family days or weeks or months down the line, has the potential to cause upset?
Oh, very much so, yes.
And again, I wonder then why, in accordance with what is written here in the policy, that it's for the flow to establish which tissues or organs have been retained, why you appear not to have taken any steps to gather that information.
I don't actually remember being told anything like that from the post-mortem results. Now, I can't remember. No, I can't remember or understand why I was either told that information or provided with that information, or what document that would be on for me to read. I can't remember where that would be. I don't remember, I can't remember why, or I don't understand why I would not know that information.
Mm-hmm.
I would expect that to be in some sort of briefing for everybody to know within the investigation, those circumstances.
There were certainly PIRC investigators present at the post-mortem.
Yes.
And then there was an interim post-mortem report that confirmed what organs and samples had been taken. But the way the policy reads is it appears to put the onus on the flow to establish which tissues or organs have been retained. And I'm keen to understand, it might assist the chair to understand, what steps, if any, you took to establish what tissues or organs had been retained.
I would have made steps to read the information, and the extent of what you're telling me, I don't remember reading anything with that. And if I've missed it, then I don't understand how I've missed it. I'm surprised I haven't been told, even from the point of view of well, I've been at the post-mortem, that kind of information sort of being provided, even verbally. I can't remember if that was done or not. So,
Looking back, is there anything that you could have done to establish what tissues or organs had been retained?
I could certainly have. Yeah, obviously, there was a post-mortem report, so I don't remember not reading it, but I can't remember that extent of organs and samples being retained. So I can't explain that.
But looking back, could you perhaps have made a call to Billy Little or one of the other investigators who'd been present at the post-mortem?
I think that for that detail, I would be looking for that information. And I don't remember that information being passed during the meetings with the family at all. I don't remember that at all.
But looking back, is it possible that a phone call to Billy Little or perhaps a phone call to the pathologist to ask what tissues or
I
samples
certainly mean, a phone
had been
call to
taken?
Billy, I could have got more detail of that. I've known, even later on, after the initial contact with the family. Yes, there could have been more information. I can't remember if we had that discussion or not. It's
Or a call to the pathologist?
I think that would be a kind of last resort from me. I'd expect to find that information within the organising, the investigation side of things. It's I would do that if I couldn't get the information and it was urgently required. But in this occasion, no, I didn't do that.
I wonder if we can return to the flow log, please, and move on to the next entry. This is on page 23 of the PDF. This is the entry that follows on from the meeting with the family, 17:30 hours, 4th of May. After discussion with Police Scotland, decision was made to release Aaron Crescent back to Colette. 3 times knives seized for comparison to knife in possession of Sheku. Prescribed drugs also seized to assist with toxicology. Who was it who seized the knives and the drugs? Do you play any part in that?
I don't know if that was ourselves or whether it was Police Scotland did that. I can't remember. If I've signed a production label, then yes, it was myself that did it. I don't remember doing that.
Okay, I don't have access to the production labels, but that's no doubt something that we can check. Now, I wonder if we can jump back to page 19 of the PDF. We looked at this entry when you began your evidence on the 8th. It's an entry that appears to be out of place. This is an entry, a call to Amar Anwar to advise that the house at Aaron Crescent was to be returned to the family by 10 o'clock in the evening. And this entry is dated 2015 on the 4th. So it appears to be out of sequence. It's been entered in the log before the entry relating to the visit to the family, but it relates to a conversation that took place after the meeting with the family. Did you speak with Mr. Anwar in person?
In relation to the house being returned?
Well, I'm just keen to understand whether you actually spoke with him or whether this was a voice message. It says phone call. Does that mean that you would have actually spoken to him?
Yeah, a person contacted Amar Anwar, yeah.
And of course, he knew that you were going to meet with the family at 6:30. We've already looked at the entry in
Yeah.
the log from just before 5:30 when you told him you were going to have a meeting with the family. Beyond telling him in this call that the house was to be returned to the family, did you report back to him on how the meeting with the family had gone?
Not at that time. I think it was because at that time when the house was returned, it was about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 10 o'clock at night. I think it was.
This call's at 8:15 in the evening?
Yeah, well, that'd be a phone call to him to let him know we'd secured the return of the family, the home address to the family.
Absolutely, but I'm wondering whether you took the opportunity at the time of making that call to give him an update on how your meeting with the family had gone.
I don't remember having that conversation, no.
Okay. And did you tell him, for example, that you hadn't mentioned the results of the postmortem to the family?
No, I don't remember having that conversation.
And did you ask him at that juncture whether he had shared that information with the family?
No.
Can we move on to what is page 24 of the PDF, please? So sequentially, this is the next entry, 2200 hours on the 4th of the 5th, and it says that the house at Aaron Crescent returned to Addie Johnston. He videoed the house on his phone, advised Ray knives and prescribed drugs taken from house. He seemed more calm and again confirmed Amar Anwar will be contact for the family, clearly still upset and frustrated. Can I ask why the house was returned to Addie? It wasn't his house.
Well, I phoned him to let him know the house was being returned, and it was Addie and I think his brother-in-law turned up. Myself and John were there. I didn't have any issue. I mean, the issue was they wanted personal belongings out of the house, so I was there to provide that assistance. And we did have a discussion about that, and he decided that would be dealt with at a later date. So it was really handing the phone back to the family, and Addie was the person who turned up in relation to the family. I had no concerns about returning it to Addie.
Maybe that's entirely proper. I was just curious because it was Colette Bell's house, not Addie Johnston's
I appreciate
house.
that. I mean, Colette was at Addie's home address the last time I spoke to her, so the fact that she didn't have access to her own home, I just assumed, well, Addie was a member of the family. It would be a completely different situation if it was a complete stranger who had turned up to take that, then that would not have happened.
Okay. And you record that, again, it was confirmed that Amar Anwar would be the contact for the family. Addie was clearly still upset and frustrated. I'm wondering what you did at this time to offer reassurance and ease the frustrations.
Again, it was about the contact with the police and how just basically reiterating how we would be moving forward with the investigation. Again, this is early contact. The priority to me, as I said from the very outset, was from the family that they wanted the house back, and there was obviously confusion as to who had control of that house. I took this as a positive step forward to securing that, albeit it's late at night, but it was a positive step forward to assure the family that we were doing our best to move things forward.
Let's carry on going through the log. That, I think, is the last entry for the 4th of May, and it's timed 10 p.m. What time did you go off duty?
Oh. I think it'd be the early hours of the morning. I think it was after midnight, I think, by the time we got back down the road. I can't remember the exact time, but it was certainly a lot later than that. Obviously, to travel back down to Hamilton, so it'd be, I don't know, maybe after midnight.
Okay. If we can go on to the next page, please. I think it's 25 of the PDF. So we're now on to the 5th of May, entry 09:47 hours, text message from Amar Anwar to call him urgently. And if we scroll down, we'll see that again, that's written up later at 17:10 hours. I think we can move through these entries quite quickly, thank you. On the next page, an entry at 10:29, return call Ray, previous entry. Amar Anwar asking why police officers involved in the incident have not been suspended, advised responsibility of Police Scotland, stated he'll be phoning the Lord Advocate and Police Scotland to complain. Thereafter had meeting with John Mitchell, Irene Scully and John McSpurran, Billy Little and John Clarkin, agreed a meeting to be arranged and to request same via Amar Anwar. So what was the purpose of this meeting that you had with John Mitchell, Irene Scully and John McSpurran, Billy Little and John Clarkin?
Just to ask, bring them up to speed in relation to what Mr. Anwar was contacting me about, and my suggestion was that obviously we need a family meeting with them sooner rather than later. So it's just a very short briefing, if you like, to bring them up to speed with that phone call. That's all.
And when you say agreed a meeting to be arranged and to request same via Amar Anwar, what was the purpose of arranging this meeting?
Again, with your family liaison, you want to meet the family on a regular basis. You want, I personally prefer direct contact and communication with the family. This particular situation, and with the families respecting the family's wishes, it was an indirect form of communication through Mr. Anwar. That's the challenges of being a family liaison officer and arranging that. So I brought them very quickly up to speed with what Mr. Anwar was saying, and it would be agreed to arrange a meeting sooner rather than later through Mr. Anwar.
Great. If we carry on to the next page, please. You'll see that entry was written up at 17:20. This is the next entry, 11:07 from the 5th. Text Ray email from Amar Anwar. We'll just keep scrolling through, please. That entry was written up at 17:20. Next entry, 11:24. Phone call Ray family meeting. Agreed 10:30 hours on the 6th at Amar's office, Carlton Place in Glasgow. And if we scroll to the bottom, we see that was written up at 17:25. So these were the arrangements for the meeting with the family the following day.
Yes.
Arrangements being made. Again, for completeness, there are 3 flow logs. We're only going to go through the first one, every single page. But for completeness, I'd like to go through all of the entries. So if we can scroll on to the next one, please. 11:32 in the 5th, phone call to advise family PIRC investigators will be working in the area. What was the purpose of that call?
Again, just it's purely advise the family that we've got there was a large number, or the majority of investigators were up doing door to door and working in the area. So part of the role is managing the information, and with social media, is trying to manage that as well. What are all these people up there doing? Why are they asking questions? And it's to just let them know that we are up there working in the area and moving the investigation forward.
And that entry was written up at 17:25. Now, this next entry is a contact with Amar Anwar, dated 14:20 hours on the 5th. Let's look at this one in its entirety. Phone call from Amar. He has spoken with Lord Advocate, who has stated post-mortem will be put on hold. Reminded of phone call and entry at page 14. And the entry at page 14, that's the call that you had at 17:48 hours
Yes.
the previous evening, where you record having told him the results of the post-mortem examination. Is that right?
Yes.
Further reminded the family refused to do formal identification, and Crown had directed PM would go ahead on the 4th of the 5th. Stated he was with family and he was unaware of PM, reminded of entry at page 14. That's the same entry. And let's just scroll down to see when that was written up. That was written up at 17:30 hours. So let's look at the text of that entry again, because I've got some questions to ask you about this. Phone call from Amar. He has spoken with Lord Advocate, who has stated post-mortem will be put on hold. What did you think when he said that to you?
I was surprised at that information.
What was going through your mind?
Yeah, the Lord, I would assume that the Lord Advocate would know through Dave Green and management within the Crown Office that the post-mortem had taken place.
Okay. And you say reminded him of phone call and entry at page 14. Let's flip back to that very quickly. It's actually page 18 of the PDF. Now, at this point in time, you hadn't written up the entry on page 14. So when you say reminded him of entry at page 14, is that shorthand for you reminding him about this conversation?
It's the conversation we had at that time on the 4th about the result of the post-mortem.
Okay, so let's look at this quickly, simply because we looked at it back on the 8th of February, but we haven't looked at it since. So it's 1748, advised Amar Anwar of result of PM, unascertained death, subject to toxicology and brain tissue exam, asked who the pathologist had been, unaware at that time. At the time of the call, Amar had his children with him, also asked if he could obtain GP details for the PIRC to obtain medical records of Sheku for pathologist. Okay. So when you say you reminded him of that phone call, what did you say to him?
Just that reminding him of the phone call in relation to the result of the post-mortem.
And how did he react to that?
I can't remember how he reacted to it. I think that's when he said the family was with him and they were unaware.
Can we go back to the entry we were looking at a moment ago? It's on page 30 of the PDF. So he said he was with the family and he was unaware of the PM, and again you reminded him of the conversation you say took place the night before. Again, how did you feel? What was going through your mind when Amar told you that he was with the family and he was unaware that the post-mortem had taken place?
That's why I reminded him of it. I couldn't understand that he was saying that basically the post-mortem had gone ahead and I'd given him the information in relation to the result of the post-mortem. So not being aware of it, I couldn't understand that.
How did he react to you saying that?
I can't remember any particular reaction in relation to that conversation, other than stating he was with the family and he was unaware of the post-mortem. So I reminded him of the entry and informing him of the result of the post-mortem.
The tone of this written entry is quite calm. Was the conversation a calm conversation?
I don't remember it. I don't remember anything other than a calm conversation.
Could you hear anything going on in the background?
No, don't recall anything like that in the background.
So during the course of this conversation, you became aware that Amar's position was that he was unaware that the autopsy had taken place, and indeed he'd spoken to the Lord Advocate, who was going to have it pushed back. When you realised that was his position, what were you thinking? How did you feel?
Again, I can only go with what the post-mortem. Crown had instructed that the post-mortem was going ahead on the 4th, and I'd told Mr. Anwar the result of the post-mortem. So again, as you say, for the Lord Advocate to come in and say it was been put on hold, I couldn't understand that. And that, how that has happened within the Crown Office, I don't know. That's something for the Crown Office to answer.
But did you appreciate that, irrespective of how it had come about, there had been a fundamental breakdown in communication here?
There would appear to have been, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And what did you do about it?
I highlighted it to senior management within the organisation.
Who did you speak to?
Probably Bill Little initially.
What did you tell him?
Just exactly what's written there, is that the Lord Advocate was instructing the post-mortem would put on hold, but it had already taken place.
And what, if anything, did Billy do about that, to your knowledge?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a conversation with Crown or not in relation to that.
Did it cross your mind that this breakdown in communication had the potential, rightly or wrongly, to result in a complaint?
Oh, very much so, yeah.
I wonder if we can bring up Mr. Amar's relates response. Again, he had the opportunity to comment on this entry and his views were sought. Thank you. If we can scroll down, it's Roman numeral 7. Thank you. To put this in context, Mr. Lewis, Mr. Amar explains in his response that he had an exchange with the Lord Advocate on the 5th, in the course of which he requested that the post-mortem be delayed, and he says that the Lord Advocate acceded to that request. He then goes on to say, at Roman numeral 7, the family were in my office that afternoon, and when I spoke to Alistair Lewis, advising him of my discussion with the Lord Advocate. It was only at that stage that I was told the PM had gone ahead. Some members of the family became visibly upset and angry. Alistair Lewis was unable to provide a satisfactory explanation as to why they had not awaited the family. He never once said that he had advised me of the PM the previous day. So I'd like to invite your comment on that, but if we can perhaps take it in parts. He says some members of the family became visibly upset and angry. I asked you earlier, just a few moments ago, if you could tell what was going on in the background, and you said you couldn't. Mr. Amar says that some of the family members were upset and angry. Did you have any sense of that during the call?
No.
Okay. He also says that you were unable to provide a satisfactory explanation as to why they hadn't waited for the family. Do you recall being asked about that?
I don't recall being asked that specifically, other than what's in my flow log, as to the Crown had instructed that the post-mortem was going ahead, and that I had told them the result of the post-mortem.
And Mr. Amar also says that you never once said that you'd advised him of the PM the previous day. So he denies you referring back to the entry that we've looked at page 14 of your log. Can I invite your comment on that?
Well, that's Mr. Anmar's opinion, but I've got it logged there that I did tell him the result of the post-mortem, and it's the Crown instruction was that the post-mortem was going ahead.
And that contact was at 14:20 hours. If we could perhaps return briefly to the log. I think we were on page 30 of the log. If we can scroll to the bottom, please, just so we can see when that entry was written up. So that entry, which relates to a contact at 14:20 hours, was written up at 17:30 hours. Now, so far, none of the entries that we've looked at in the flow log are contemporaneous. And if my maths is any good, this is the 19th entry in the log. You've told us that no entries at all were written up on the 4th. Yes?
I think so. On the 4th of May, yeah. Yes,
no entries were written up on the 4th. And the very first entry is dated the 5th of May and timed at 2 p.m. Do you accept that? I've got a note of you having said that on the 8th of February, but if it assists, we can go back and look at the timestamp on the entries. So by the time that you put pen to paper at 2 o'clock on the afternoon of the 5th, you were holding in your memory the information from the briefing when you were appointed as a flow, the flow meeting with Little and Clarkin at which the strategy was discussed, Harrower's update to you on the family position about identification, the detail of your meeting with Mitchell and Parker, a message from Addy to the effect that Amar Anwar was acting for the family, confirmation from Mr. Anwar that that was the case, a telephone call from Addy during which he requested a home visit, a courtesy call from to him, Mr. Anwar, about the home visit, the call to Mr. Anwar at 17:48 regarding the results of the post-mortem, the detail of the meeting with the family at 6:30 in the evening, 3 calls about the return of the house at Arran Crescent, a number of calls on the morning of the 5th about setting up a meeting for the following day. And that's a lot of information to be holding in your memory.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and having looked back through my flow log since giving evidence, I have clearly had notes in relation to that. There is a facility on the IT system within Clue 2 as it was at the time to have information. You can create a flow family contact. So I can't remember if I put anything into that, or I've had an accumulation of notes elsewhere. I've since been back looking for that information. I can't recollect how I recorded it or where it is, but I can't find it now. So I've either been doing it from an IT point of view, and that is me updating my flow log from my notes. Where those notes are, I can't find them.
So are you confident in your recollection that you were keeping some sort of contemporaneous record?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I obviously was keeping notes, and it's not uncommon to start when you have the sort of physical flow log through simple logistics point of view. It's not uncommon to run out of flow logs, and from a stationary point of view, so you don't just don't take notes. Where I have recorded those notes, I don't know. I've hunted high and low for them from an IT point of view, and I wasn't one for a day book as such, but I've clearly had the opportunity to sit down and update my flow log from those notes I'd taken at the time.
If you were taking notes at the time, why didn't you take those notes directly into the flow log? Is that not the purpose of the log?
That's taking that time to sit down, and that's why you have those entries there, and that's the only explanation I give is that I've sat down and taken those notes and transferred those notes into my flow log.
Okay. So your evidence is that you did keep some form of record at the time?
Yeah, I must have done, because there's, as much as my memory was better back then, it's certainly not that good.
You say you must have done, but do you have a recollection of keeping notes at the time?
I do have a recollection of keeping notes, I just don't know where they are. I can't.
And you say they could have been on the Clue 2 system, they could have been handwritten. Do you recall how you were keeping a note?
I think it's more likely I had handwritten notes rather than accessing the IT system.
And do you recall that clearly, or are you making that assumption?
It's the only explanation I can give, because there's no way I can remember all that information from memory.
So should we understand that on the basis that you accept that this was a lot of information to be holding in your memory, your evidence today is that that wasn't really possible and you must have taken a record at the time?
I must have had a record of some sort, yeah.
But you haven't been able to find it?
No.
When did you look for it?
Well, prior to, or after giving evidence here, I realised that I must have had notes somewhere, so I've looked back and I can't find anything, both from an IT point of view as my own work laptop, and there's nothing there, and I don't have those notes.
Okay. So should we understand that you don't clearly recall keeping a note at the time, but think you must have done? Is that fair?
I must have done, because I wouldn't make it up. I'd transfer my notes from whatever notes I've been taking. So, but where they are, I don't know.
So I wonder if that might be a convenient point to break.
Very well, we'll stop for 20 minutes. Ms Thompson.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, shortly before the break, you said that you must have kept a note, a contemporaneous note of your dealings with the family and with Mr. Anwar on the 4th and the 5th of May, and that had formed the basis of the entries in the flow log. Can I ask, what is your normal practice? Is it your normal practice to keep a record somewhere other than the flow log and write it up at a later point in time?
I have done it in the past where a flow log has maybe not been immediately available to me. And I did notice when I was the entries when I was giving my statement back in October for the inquiry about the timings, and if I have used some other form of written work in the past, I've stapled it inside the first page of the flow log, or I have created a document and lodged them. I'm annoyed at myself that obviously can't remember where I've done it. I'm also annoyed at myself that I haven't made an entry in the flow log to make reference to wherever that information might be. As I say, since given the statement and having been here back in the beginning of February, I cannot remember what I've done with or where they are.
Was a flow log available to you when you came on duty and were appointed as a flow on the morning of the 4th? They
are. I mean, we have flow logs within the stationery cupboard. Whether or not it was actually there at the time, I can't actually remember. But if I came in and there wasn't one, I would have started a log as such in relation to my contact. And that's why my only explanation is that is me transferring my notes into my flow log. And I'm annoyed with myself as to why I have not made a record in relation to doing that, because I've done it in the past, whether it's be a few entries or the number of entries I've made on this occasion. So where that is, I don't know.
You'd been to Hamilton before you made your way to Kirkcaldy. You'd been to the PIRC offices. Can we assume that there's a stationery store there and you would have access to things like flow logs?
Yeah, and only if I was taking notes, it's maybe as I said before, it's not uncommon due to the amount of deployments to either run out and there's an order coming in or whatever. But just because there's flow logs there, and if there's a flow log there, I would have used it almost immediately. Would I, if there wasn't a flow log there, would I not use something else to maintain my notes? Then I would. It's not a case of I must put it into the flow log immediately.
Okay, if a flow log had been available to you on the morning of the 4th, would there have been any reason to make your contemporaneous notes anywhere other than in the flow log?
No, I'd normally, usually when I get a deployment, I'll take a flow log with me and make my notes either right there and then, or as soon as maybe sitting out in the car, I'll sit down and make sure it's readable more than anything else.
And we know that by 2 o'clock on the 5th you had a log because that's when you started writing it up.
Yes.
So if a flow log had not been available to you immediately and you were making notes elsewhere, which I think is what you were suggesting, where would you have kept those notes? It
would an A4 pad, a notebook of some sort.
Police or a PIRC issue notebook?
No, I wouldn't use. Probably wouldn't use my notebook because it's a small notebook. I would rather have A4 sheets that I could write the notes down on.
And you surmise that that's what you may have done on this occasion?
I'm annoyed at myself that I haven't recorded, because I've done it in the past, whether it's been a few entries or not, or more than that, because of the no availability for a full log. I've written it down and either kept it inside the log or created a document or a folder in hand. It's been part of the investigation in whatever, as a production, whatever it is, whatever that type of investigation is.
And if you did make these entries in an A4 pad, where is it now?
I don't know.
Okay, none of the conversations that you had with the family or Amar Anwar on the 4th were written up until after lunchtime on the 5th. What is best practice when it comes to writing up entries?
As soon as possible.
I think the family liaison policy says that entries to the log should be made timelessly and accurately. And why do you suppose the policy says that the entries should be made timelessly?
Because that's what you should do as much as possible, and timelessly put them in. And that's, I say, I'm annoyed that I haven't made some sort of entry in my log to explain me updating the log.
Now, you will appreciate that in relation to the call that you had with Amar Anwar at 17:48 on the 4th, advising him the results of the post-mortem examination, you will appreciate that there's a dispute around that call. And you'll appreciate too that that entry was written up only after you'd had a conversation with Amar Anwar the following afternoon when he was in his office with the family and he had told you the Lord Advocate was going to have the post-mortem pushed back. I didn't know what had happened, the family didn't know what had happened. So both those entries were written up only after that conversation happened. And I'm wondering whether, looking back now, you might think that if you'd made a note of your call to Amar Anwar at the time, that is at 17:48 hours on the 4th, if you had a contemporaneous record of it, there might be less scope for anyone to call into question the accuracy of your note.
I understand that, and as I said, that's why I'm annoyed at myself that I haven't recorded that I was making those notes elsewhere and where those notes are, but I'm not putting anything to the log that I haven't written down somewhere else, so it is accurate.
Okay. You say now you're not putting anything to log that you haven't written down somewhere else, but you're unable to produce the notes that you wrote down somewhere else. And I think you'll accept too that you didn't mention those notes to anyone before today.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, so you didn't mention them when you gave evidence on the 8th of February.
No, I didn't know.
And you didn't mention them when you gave a statement to a member of the inquiry team.
Yeah, I didn't mention it. It was an observation of myself when I looked at it, and it was more sort of after giving that statement I looked at it and I couldn't understand where I'd left those notes were. So, and again, I'm annoyed that don't have anything in the log to explain why, because I have done it in the past. Mm-hmm. So why have I not done it this occasion? And
do you accept that if you did have something in the log, a contemporaneous note, a sheet from your A4 pad folded over and stapled in, then there'd be less scope for anyone to suggest now that you might have made a mistake?
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Particularly when it comes to recounting the conversation that you had with Mr. Amar at 17:48 hours on the 4th.
Yes.
I wonder if we can return to the flow log and move on to the next entry, which is at page 31 of the PDF. Thank you. So this is an entry in relation to a contact with Amar Anwar at 15:15 hours on the 5th, and if we can perhaps read it in full. Family now wish to view the body. Is it viewable? Will be instructing their own pathologist. States Lord Advocate is astonished. PM went ahead. Amar states mother of Sheku had told Police Scotland she wished to view the body before the PM. At that time she was travelling up from England. 15:20 hours, DSI Little advised of above. And if we scroll to the bottom of that entry, please, it was completed at 17:40 hours on the 5th. So you've already given your evidence as to your understanding of the family's position in relation to identification of the body prior to the post-mortem. But here, this entry reads that the family now wish to view the body. Can you help me to understand, does viewing a body serve a different purpose from a formal identification?
It's not uncommon for families to do the formal identification, or somebody, a member who's close to the family, do a formal identification. And in these circumstances, it's not uncommon for families who, family members who have been travelling from some distance away, will ask to view the body themselves as a last goodbye, that sort of situation. So it's not uncommon to provide that facility. It means us liaising with the mortuary and the pathologist or mortuary staff to make sure it is a possibility and a facility of that.
So should we understand that viewing serves a different purpose from formal identification?
Yes.
It's more about saying goodbye.
Formal identification, it has to be done.
Yeah.
But a day or so after, if irrespective of the circumstances, if a family member wished to view their loved one, then I've lost count the amount of times I've done it, and it's just a case of us liaising with the mortuary staff to provide the same facilities.
And you say it's a way of saying goodbye?
For family members, yes, it is.
And in your experience, as an experienced flow, can it be helpful for family members to have that opportunity to say goodbye?
Oh, very much so, yes.
Let's keep moving through the entries in the log. On the next page, there's an entry, 5th of May at 15:20, contact with the pathologist, and contact Les Brown, that's at the Crown Office in relation to the family viewing. We'll just keep scrolling through these, please. Note that's written up at 17:40. Next entry, 15:35, ascertaining the feasibility of a viewing at 09:30 hours on the 6th, written up at 17:40. Next entry, 15:40 on the 5th, Kerry-Ann Shearer advises viewing as possible at 9:30 on the 6th. And we've heard evidence from Dr. Shearer already. She was the lead pathologist who performed the
Yes.
autopsy. If we keep scrolling down, please. Entry written up at 17:45. Next entry is 15:43, voicemail message to Amar advising Ray family viewing, written up at 17:50. Next, 16:35, Amar will speak to family Ray viewing. So is this an example here of you using the solicitor as a single point of contact?
Yes.
And he's going to go and speak with the
Yes.
family about the arrangements for the viewing.
Yes.
If we keep scrolling down, please. Written up 17:50. Next entry, 16:45 on the 5th. Amar confirms family viewing at 9:30. Family will attend themselves and will meet PIRC flows at Edinburgh City Morgue. Thereafter, meeting with family at Amar's office at 1200 hours. So again, you having had that conversation with Amar and he having undertaken to speak with the family, he's now reporting back
Yes.
that they're able to make the viewing the following morning.
Yes.
Again, if we carry on scrolling, please. Written up at 17:55. Next entry, so now it's 1000 hours, 10 a.m. on the 6th of the 5th. So we're now into the 6th of May. Let's look at this entry. Family viewing of Sheku at Edinburgh City Mortuary, Cowgate, Edinburgh. Addie and Caddy did not view. 2 times sisters and brother-in-law did view. All very emotional. Question was asked, is the right eye of Sheku missing, removed, or was it injured? Informed the eye had not been removed or injured. No other issues. And I've got a number of questions for you around this entry. Firstly, you record here who's present, Addie and Caddy, although they didn't view, and 2 sisters and a brother-in-law who did view the body. There's no mention here of Colette Bell. Was she given the opportunity to view the body?
Well, it's a family viewing, so she was never. I was never approached for asked if she wanted to view the body of Sheku.
Did you approach or ask her if she wanted to view the body of Sheku?
I didn't, no.
Why
no.
not?
The viewing of the body was, as I say, through Amar Anwar's in arranging that. Again, had that been made aware to me that she wanted to view the body, then that would have been facilitated. Rightly or wrongly, I didn't know who was coming. I did, to a certain extent, assume that Colette and possibly her mother were coming down as well, but obviously they didn't.
Can I take you to Colette Bell's statement, please? SVPI 00247. And you'll recall, perhaps, Mr. Lewis, that on the 8th of February, when you began your evidence, I took you to certain passages of Colette Bell's oral evidence in which she discussed her desire to see Sheku after she gave her a statement to the police. Can we go to paragraph 47, please? I'm asked whether I got to see Sheku in the days after we received the news the post-mortem had taken place. No. Nobody was allowed to see him until a good few weeks later, I'm sure, and we were told that we could go and view him. But at that point I didn't want to, because I wanted to see Shek for how he was, not after he's had a post-mortem. To me, I didn't know what he was going to look like. I didn't want to see him with stitches. I didn't want to remember him like that. So his family did go and see him, but I didn't. So Colette here expresses an anxiety around seeing Sheku for how he was and not after he's had a post-mortem. I didn't know what he was going to look like. I didn't want to see him with stitches. And I'm wondering if you had had a conversation with her and if she had expressed those concerns and anxieties to you, if you might have been able to offer any reassurance to her.
Yes, I could have done. It was I don't remember her expressing anything like that during conversations with her. Again, the viewing that we've been talking about, I was told the family wanted to view, so if that was 1, 2, 3, 4, if X amount of members of the family wished to turn up to the mortuary to view the body of Sheku, then again that would have been facilitated.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back, was it an assumption that Colette turned up? Should I have asked the question? I possibly would have asked the question here.
I mean, you say you don't recall her expressing these concerns during any conversations that you had with her, but prior to the family viewing on the morning of the 6th, had you had any conversation with Colette about the possibility of her viewing the body?
Not the viewing of the body, no, because it was the conversation was about formal identification, which had been completed.
I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think your evidence on the 8th of February was that you hadn't had any conversation with Colette about a formal identification.
No, not with Colette, no. The formal identification had been discussed with Keith Harrower and Addy at that time, I think it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I just want to be clear, because you said a moment ago that this issue hadn't arisen, these concerns hadn't been expressed by her in any conversation that you had with her. But should we understand that you didn't in fact have any conversation with Colette Bell prior to the morning of the 6th about her coming along to view the body?
Not prior to the 6th, no.
Okay. And I'm wondering whether, looking back, it might have been worth having that conversation. As you say, you might have been able to offer her some reassurance around what would be involved in going along to a viewing.
Yeah, without a doubt, I could say I've provided the information in relation to that, and part of the role of the flow is preparing the family for that viewing in relation to it. So it is important that as flows, or any, whether it's a police officer or flows attending, is that you do arrive there early to assess the situation and prepare the family for what may or not be there.
Mm-hmm. Colette certainly seems to express a concern for seeing Shek how he was and not how he looked after the post-mortem. She said, I didn't know what he was going to look like. Is that a common concern that families have?
I think it is because, rightly or wrongly, the general public view these sort of things on television and television programmes, and it is a distressing situation. It's very emotional, and some families will deal with it very, very quickly. Other families want to be there for quite some time, so you have to manage that.
Well, we've heard evidence of what's involved in the post-mortem examination, and it's an invasive procedure.
Is, yes.
So in your experience as a flow, do families tend to have an anxiety as to how their loved one is going to look after the post-mortem?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And Colette expresses concerns as well about stitches. I didn't want to see him with stitches. Is that the sort of concern that you've heard before too?
Oh, many times, yes.
Mm-hmm. So if these concerns had one way or another come to your door before the 6th, what might you have been able to say or do to reassure Colette and put her mind at rest and perhaps encourage her to take the opportunity to say goodbye if she felt that was helpful for her?
I could have provided her with as much information as she wanted, and I've been there before whereby the families don't want to travel there. I've taken them there. I've given them the time to do that. It's what the family want in relation to viewings. That is always doable to a certain extent. It's the logistics of arranging that and making sure it's in the appropriate situation and making sure that minimising or trying to minimise as much of the emotional distress for any family member.
Mm-hmm. And if we leave the logistics to one side, because she doesn't seem to express concern around the logistics, it's more about Shekobayo's physical appearance, might you have been able to prepare her for what to expect in terms of how he looked?
Yes, very much.
And might you have been able to offer information one way or the other as to whether there might be stitches?
Yes. Yeah.
I wonder if we can move to the family liaison policy again, please, at page 25. Third paragraph from the top reads, "It is advisable that the flow view the body at an early stage and should be repeated before viewing by any family member. The flow will thereafter be in a position to advise and prepare the family members for the viewing." Did you view Shekobayo's body in advance of the family
Yes.
viewing? You did. And if we read down a little, the next paragraph goes on to say, "The information established and sensitively given should include the condition of the body, including," if we read on, "a detailed description of the nature and extent of any injuries." And I'm wondering what information you shared with those family members who attended the viewing in advance of their viewing as to the nature and extent of the injuries that Mr. Bayo had sustained.
One of the things that came out, I think it was prior to the viewing, was the family had concerns about an eye injury, I think it was. And having viewed the body, I wasn't taken aback, but I didn't understand where that information had come from. So, as a matter of recourse, I went back. I was confident I hadn't missed such an injury, because had that injury been theirs, then I would have been speaking to the mortuary staff to say we need to cover that side of Sheko's face up to protect the family from that. If they wanted to see it, then again I would prepare them for that. But that was their concern about an eye injury, and my concern was how have I not seen that? So I went back and to confirm what I already knew, and then I said there's no eye injury. I think they thought he's maybe lost his eye, but that was not the case.
Okay, leaving aside the injury with the eye, what information did you share with the family about what to expect in terms of his physical appearance?
He was lying at peace and appeared to be asleep. Was the best way of describing it.
Okay. If we can look back at the policy, and it's the next bullet point on the screen. A detailed description of the layout of the parts of the mortuary that the family members will go into and the facilities they contain. Flows should bear in mind that when people pay their last respects, they often want to touch or kiss the body, need to perform particular cultural rites, or to view the body again later. Guidance should be sought about whether this is possible or appropriate. And I want to ask some questions about this particular requirement in the policy document. What information did you share with the family members who came to the viewing about the layout and facilities at the mortuary?
It would basically be through, I think, at Edinburgh, it's through a glass screen. There's a room set aside for viewing that's through, as I say, a glass screen for the viewing of the body.
And did you share that information with them in advance?
I don't see any reason why I wouldn't share that, because it's the layout. There was a family room, for want of a better word, when they first arrive, and that's where staff guides families to, and then we came through, introduced ourselves, and explained where we were going to within the mortuary and where it was, and that he was lying at rest.
So if any explanation was offered about viewing in the way that you've described, that explanation was given at the mortuary and not before?
Within the family room at the mortuary, yes.
And what steps did you take in advance of the viewing to ascertain whether the family might want to touch or kiss Sheku's body?
I don't remember making any specific or asking any specific questions about that, but I don't remember there being any issues as them not being able to do that.
And what steps did you take in advance of the viewing to ascertain whether the family wanted to observe any particular cultural or religious practices?
I didn't take any specific steps towards that, but again, anything like that could easily have been facilitated if the family's request.
What steps did you take in advance of the viewing to ascertain whether there was a need for the viewing to be behind a glass screen?
Not for a need for it, it's the facilities that are there, so that's where the only other option I think at that mortuary would be in the actual mortuary itself, which is not appropriate.
So the viewing room is not in the mortuary suite itself?
No, you have the mortuary suite, then you have a separate entrance. Again, this is if you're not familiar with the mortuary layout, you arrive so you can ascertain how you're going to get the family in and out of the mortuary. There is a family entrance, so you facilitate that, and they're guided to a family room.
So there's a family room with a glass screen into a viewing room, if we might call it that?
No,
No?
From recollection, I think as you walk in the door, the family room is off to the left at Edinburgh. There's a short corridor or hallway to a door which takes you into the viewing room. Then you close the doors, and then the curtains are pulled back by mortuary staff, and through that glass glass window is the viewing room.
Okay. And the viewing room, just want to be clear on this, is not part of the mortuary suite. It's separate from the mortuary suite.
Yeah, it's away from.
It's away from the mortuary suite. All right. So there is a viewing room, there is a glass screen with curtains, and the family view the body from the other side of that glass screen.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's just look again at what the policy says. Detailed description of the layout of the parts of the mortuary that the family members will go into, the facilities they contain. Flows should bear in mind that when people pay their last respects, they often want to touch or kiss the body, need to perform particular cultural rites, or view the body again later. Guidance should be sought about whether this is possible or appropriate. I'm wondering what guidance you sought as to whether it would be possible for the family to view Sheku Bayo not from behind the screen, but from the other side of that glass screen into the viewing room. What guidance did you take as to whether that would be possible?
I didn't seek any guidance at that time, but had the family wished to do that, that would have been a simple phone call to facilitate that. I'm confident that I could have made that decision at the time, because I saw no reason why it couldn't happen. So, but I would have made the phone call to confirm it could be done, and that just might have been a simple case of stepping back out to the family room and facilitating that. So again, had it been asked, I'm confident I could have facilitated that.
So if the family had asked if they could approach Sheku's body to touch him or kiss him or perform a religious or cultural rite, you're confident that request could have been acceded to?
Yeah, at the most it would have been a phone call to confirm whether or not that was possible.
Now, a few moments ago, in your evidence, I asked you what steps you took in advance of the viewing to ascertain whether the family might want to touch or kiss Sheku or perform a religious or cultural rite. And you said you didn't ask.
I didn't ask the family?
Mm-hmm.
No, I didn't. No, I don't remember making that question.
I'd like to take you to Caddy's evidence, and we'll begin with her inquiry statement, SBPI 00236 at paragraph 22. I'm asked whether, as a family, we were able to see Sheku after the post-mortem. Yes, after that, Amar did arrange for us to go and view the body. It was somewhere in Edinburgh we went to see him, but it was only his face. We saw through a glass. That's all we saw. It was all confined. It was just his face, nothing else. Everywhere else was fully covered. We didn't touch him, nothing at all. Somebody took us into the room where he was, and then the person went out and left us there. We were shocked to see that there was a glass partition and that we cannot touch him or anything, but that's how it was. They just left us there and they went away, and after some time we came out of the room. And I'm now going to read you a chapter from her oral evidence before I ask for your comment. She was asked, you mentioned in your statement that he was behind glass. Was that explained to you before you went that he would be behind glass? No. And you've mentioned earlier about wanting to touch Sheku. As I understand it, that wasn't permitted, yes. Had that been explained to you, that he would be behind glass and you wouldn't be able to touch him? I think it would have prepared us mentally to know what to expect when we walked in. But when we walked in, we just saw the glass and they opened a curtain. They opened a curtain and we just saw his face. We were quite surprised, to see him like that, because we were expecting to touch him, feel him, but nothing. We didn't have that opportunity, and we were not prepared to go in to see him through a glass and just see his face, and that's all. And in terms of being given more information to allow you to prepare, would you have found that helpful before you arrived at the mortuary or on arrival? What would have been most helpful to you? Most helpful if we'd got that information before we got there. But even so, if when we arrived they had told us that information, that would have helped us as well. Having not had that information, what impact has that had on you long term? Well, like I said, a big impact, because all we saw is his face through a glass window, and that was it. We didn't touch him, we didn't have that connection with him. We didn't speak to him, nothing at all. He was just there, and that's all. Can I invite your comment on that?
It's a lot to comment about, but it's certainly, I remained within the viewing room throughout, and it is normal practice for the body to be covered other than the face. And again, had the questions been asked, I would have sought more information from the pathologist or mortuary staff in particular who were there as to the condition of the body, and then I would have again viewed it myself, and then prior to, if the family wanted to do that, I would then have to go back through and explain to them the condition post-mortem and prepare them for that. And if they wish to do that, and during that time I could have made the phone call to confirm it could be done, and it would have been facilitated. But I didn't leave them. The only time I left them alone was when they were back in the family room, to allow them some privacy for their emotions, and as and when they were ready to come back out, and would take them out the mortuary.
I think you'll appreciate that the tone of Caddy's evidence was that the family were surprised that Sheku was behind glass, and they felt they were denied that opportunity to approach him, touch him, kiss him, talk to him, say goodbye in that way. And your evidence, I think, is that if they had asked, then you would have been able to facilitate.
Done everything possible to facilitate that. From my point of view, this is possibly an example of, if I had had direct access with the family from the outset, I could have prepared them to a greater extent in relation to this. We were preparing, we'd asked me to view the body, and that contact was through Mr. Anmar, quite rightly through their single point of contact. Their wishes, had that been expressed to me through Mr. Anmar or any other member of the family, I would have done my utmost to provide that facility.
Okay, you say if you'd had access at the outset, and you clearly feel that you didn't, but what you did have was access to the family on the morning of the 6th. You were there with them in the mortuary itself in advance of the viewing. And you've said several times now, if the question had been asked, then you would have been able to facilitate the request. This is a family who less than 3 days previously received the news that they'd lost a loved one in the most traumatic of circumstances. And I'm wondering whether, with hindsight, rather than expecting them to come to you and say, hang on, there's a glass screen here, we didn't expect that. Can we please approach Shekel? Can we kiss him? Can we touch him? Can we speak with him and say our goodbyes? Whether with hindsight, you should have raised the issue with the family.
I think in those circumstances, in the circumstances where, yes, I probably could have done, but it was not, I'm not dismissing that facility. That facility was there. And yet, could I have asked the question? Yes, I probably could have done.
And looking back, might that have been a good thing to do?
I think I prepared them at the time for what I had viewed myself at that time, and I'd explained to them it was through a glass window. Hindsight, could I have explored it more and asked if there were any wishes in relation to what they wanted to do? Yeah, probably could have done.
And can you understand that a family who are being told, this is the glass screen, the curtains will part, you'll see your loved one on the other side of the glass screen, might not appreciate that they had any other option?
Yeah, I would accept that.
And having been told, these are the viewing arrangements, and being in that immediate phase of shock, having learned less than 3 days previously of the traumatic death of their loved one, that it might not even cross their minds to ask the question.
That is possible. I think it's fair to say that we're not telling them this is how it is. This is the facilities that have been provided at that moment, so I'm providing those facilities. And you're right, maybe I should have asked the question as to would they like to, anything that they would like to do and confirm that. Hindsight, yeah, I probably could have done that.
Okay. Can I read you a little more from Caddy's oral evidence? After the viewing, were you offered any support? Nothing at all? No. Is there anything, looking back now, is there anything that you would have found helpful? I think it would have been helpful if we were prepared, what we were going in to see. And after that, any support at all, but we didn't get nothing like that. All we got was they took us into a room to see him, and that was it. They said we could stay as long as we could, but that's all we got, and that was it. And I appreciate that by this time you've instructed solicitors, yes. Looking back now, would it have been helpful to still have attempts at contact by a family liaison officer or something of that sort? Well, these were the things I was expecting. If we had a good relationship with the family liaison officer, maybe we would have all been there, for that moral support. Do you wish to make any comment on that evidence?
I understand what they're saying, and that's the whole point. As I said before, I fully respect their wishes to have a family solicitor involved. But if I do not have, or any fellow does not have that direct contact with the family on a regular basis, it is a challenge to understand their wishes, and it's a challenge to facilitate a lot of those wishes. Indirect communication creates the situation of possible time restraints, so to get that interaction with the family is important. I disagree with the fact that I didn't offer support. I don't just simply do the job and say thanks very much, that's it, and walk out the door. I always make a point of saying, is there anything I can help you with? Is there any questions you have for me that will assist you? I do remember saying that because I do it all the time. Is there something I can do to help you at this moment in time? And there was no thank you very much, and that was it. And we escorted them off the premises. So it's not a case of me simply doing the job and here's the viewing and that's it. They can spend as much time as they want. Any family can spend as much time as they want.
Looking back now, do you feel that there's anything more that you might have done to prepare Mr. Bio's family for the viewing?
I think from the information I had at the time, I did as much as I possibly could have done. As I said, even though the viewing had been done by the family members, I did offer, is there anything I can help that would make this situation better for yourself? Do you have any questions at this time in relation to investigation? And there was no questions. I understand the circumstances and the emotions that were going through at that time, and that's the whole point of asking the questions. Is there anything I can do to help you that will make it? I'm not a counsellor, as I've said before, but I do have the facility, the ability to facilitate additional requests. And it's, as I say, worst case scenario, it's a phone call.
Can we go back to the log, please, and to the next entry in the log, which is on page 39 of the PDF? So this relates to the meeting afterwards, 12:15 on the 6th of May. Attended at the office of Amar Anwar, Addie Johnson plus 4 family members, DSI Little and SI Mixborn present. Questions put to the PIRC and responded to. Agreed it was important to speak to Addie, Caddy, Colette and her mother Lorraine and obtain statements. Confirmed he, I think that must be Mr Anwar, was Spock for family. Also told of result of PM in presence of the family by DSI Little, unascertained subject to toxicology and brain tissue exam. Sorry, can you scroll down a little, please? Thank you. Also asked to ensure Addie updates Cheika's previous partner on a regular basis. So I've got a number of questions about this entry. There's a reference here to questions being asked and answers given, and I'm wondering why the questions and answers haven't been recorded here in the flow log.
Not by me, no. The questions were, I was there, I was present at the meeting, but the questions were being put to Bill Little and John McSporn. I did see them taking notes, but I don't know what notes they were taking.
About 6 lines from the bottom, 6 or 7 lines, confirmed he was Spock for the family. I take it that's Mr Anwar.
Yes. Yes, yeah, Addie said that Mr Anwar would be the point of contact, yeah.
Okay. Also told of result of PM in presence of the family by DSI Little, unascertained subject to toxicology and brain tissue exam. So who was told the result of the PM?
Well, to Mr Anwar and the family members present at that time.
Okay, and why was that considered necessary if, as you say, you told Mr Anwar the result of the PM on the evening of the 4th and had assumed that he would have cascaded that information to the family?
Again, it was maybe Bill Little just reiterating the result of the post-mortem, but that's what he said.
Unascertained subject to toxicology and brain tissue examination. There's no entry here to suggest that the family were told that the entire brain and cervical spinal cord had been retained, and indeed you've already given evidence that that came as news to you today. Can you help us to understand why that information would not have been shared with the family at this meeting?
I can't at that time, and I don't specifically mean aware of that information at that time, so if Billy had that information at the time, I don't know why he didn't go into that detail.
Also asked to ensure Addie updates Cheika's previous partner on a regular basis. Can you explain that entry? It's the final sentence.
Yeah, it's with any the dynamics of any family, any deployment, the dynamics of any family can become, well, they are completely different. Where there is a previous partner on this occasion, it's important for the role of either the Spock or, on this occasion, speaking to Addie, that information is cascaded to the family and a previous partner. If there had been an issue in relation to family relationships and we required to deploy another flow, then we could have done that to assist other members of the family. So been there where there has been a split in the family due to relationships, nothing to do with what's happened, but just that's the dynamics of the family. So you wouldn't deploy, or I wouldn't deploy one flow into that situation. Potentially 2 flows working together, but if I was dealing with one side of the family, that would have been my job. The other flow would deal with the other side of the family. So it's making sure that the information is being cascaded to the family members.
So you were aware that Cheika Bio had a previous partner
Yes.
with whom he had a child?
Yes.
Is that Connie Barczyk?
Yes.
Had you made contact with her?
No, I hadn't, and that was from a very early stage of speaking to Addie.
Okay, why hadn't you made contact with her?
Again, you're creating a single point of contact with the family, and I explained at the time if there was any issues at all to let me know, and I could again facilitate that and make sure information was being cascaded.
The chair has before him a statement that was taken from Connie Barczyk. It's a PIRC statement. I don't think we need to bring it up on the screen, but the reference is PIRC 00072 for anyone following the evidence. And in her statement, she confirms that she learned about Sheku's death at shortly after 9 o'clock on the Sunday evening via Facebook. A friend had sent a Facebook message and she phoned the friend who broke the news. Connie then phoned Caddy, who confirmed that Sheku had passed away. And Caddy had told Connie that she'd given the police Connie's contact details at 3 o'clock that day and thought that Connie knew. Do you have any comment to make on that state of affairs?
Again, that's the delivery of a death message. It's important to identify the family dynamics as much as possible. And once you've identified, if you have that knowledge of, as I say, in this occasion, a previous partner, it's just as important to deliver the death message to, in this occasion, Colette, but also to Connie. So I would have expected Police Scotland, and I've had that experience myself, both within the police and other investigations within the PIRC, where you have a previous partner and a new partner, and it's important that that death message is delivered, and again, the importance of getting the flows in to liaise with that side until you establish the full circumstances.
Did you become aware at some point that she had learned of Sheku's death through Facebook?
No, I wasn't aware of that, no.
If you had been aware of that, might you have thought it appropriate to make contact with her?
I would have done, yes. Yeah.
What would have been the purpose of making that contact with her?
Again, just to introduce myself and to ascertain from my own point of view that everything was in hand, and that she understood what our role was and how, if she needed any information, if the contact for the family, as in Sheku's immediate family and Colette, was through the solicitor, then we would have deployed a flow to assist Connie.
I'm wondering why it was left to Addy to update her. Addy was the husband of her former partner's sister. It wasn't a particularly close connection.
Again, this is a conversation you have with families in relation to that, and you become aware of a previous partner. To me, that's part of the family makeup, that's part of the family dynamics, and again, you want a single point of contact to be updating. So if there's nothing highlighted and there's no issues in relation to that, and you get reassurances that's been done, it's not, I'm not there to criticise. As long as I have that reassurance that has been done, then I'm content with that. If somewhere down the line I establish that that information was not being passed on, again, you take a step back and you reassess the situation. Do we need another flow into the investigation?
And looking back, do you think it was best practice for Addy to be left to update Connie, particularly given the circumstances in which she'd come to hear about Sheku's passing?
I agree with the way she came to find out about it, and that goes back to the very beginning of, if Police Scotland were aware of that, that should have been implemented at the earliest opportunity, and then putting flows in to establish the circumstances in relation to that. And was there a need for flows to be there before we became involved? And I would suggest that in this, as it's been highlighted, there was a need for that.
We can return to the flow log, please. There follow some entries that are to do with the practical arrangements for taking statements from witnesses, which I don't think we need to look at. I wonder if we can skip forward to page 45 of the PDF, which I think should take us to the 7th of May at 9:30 in the morning. A call on the telephone with Amar Anwar, updated Amar with a general overview of the morning briefing, no details, confirmed Sheku was Muslim, no issues. Interested to note that it was on the 7th of May, apparently, that Mr. Anwar confirmed to you that Sheku was Muslim. Had that not been confirmed previously? Was that not known?
I think that's maybe just another confirmation of, through conversation, because I was aware very early on that he was Muslim.
Okay. There then follow some further entries relating to making arrangements for noting statements that I don't think it would serve a useful purpose for us to go through those. And that takes us to the end of the first logbook. There are 2 further logbooks. I'm not intending on going through those. Instead, I would like to ask you questions around a number of themes. And the first of those themes is media. And I wonder if you can help me to understand what the media strategy was so far as this inquiry was concerned, particularly with reference to the family.
In relation to what, keeping them updated, or?
Yes, I perhaps don't need to take you back to the family liaison strategy, but if you'll take it from me that on page 28 there's an entry that requires the flow to inform the family of the PIRC media strategy and ensure they're aware of all media releases by the PIRC. Yeah. And there is also a section on page 28 headed Media Matters, which draws attention to the way in which deaths are sometimes reported by the media and the possibility for inaccurate reporting and the potential impact on families who are already experiencing trauma. So I'm just wondering what you can tell us about the media strategy that related to this particular case.
It's the same with any families, in the point whether there's a media interest or not. It's preparing the family for the possibility of the media turning up at their door. If the media, the press in general, become a nuisance, for want of a better word, to the family and are causing them undue distress, our corporate services media can approach editors, producers, etc. to say, take a step back. And that we can manage that and assist with any kind of intrusion into their privacy. We can also approach the family to allow them the opportunity to choose a photograph of their choice rather than something off Facebook, for want of a better word. And unfortunately, with one of the biggest hurdles, which has been demonstrated quite recently in media coverage of police contact or death following police contact down south, is the control of that media and how quickly information can get out in the public domain. And it's very easy, again, for me, likes of myself, for anybody to say, try and ignore it. It's almost a physical impossibility nowadays to ignore what has been reported in the media, on Facebook. You do have people who simply want to be involved. They've got no involvement in that situation whatsoever, but they want to feel involved, and they will vent their feelings or make comments on Facebook or on other social media. So it's controlling that and trying to prepare the family for that. And that, again, from a support point of view, can I assist in that? Yes, I can. I can't say we'll stop it 100%, but we can certainly minimise the intrusion to the family privacy.
Can I ask you to look at a press release by the SPF? It's SPF 00010A. So we see that it's dated the 14th of May. It's a media release issued by the Scottish Police Federation. There's an explanation of who they are and what they do. Speaking in response to comments made at the press conference by representatives of the family, the chairman of the SPF said, "The SPF recognises that the family of Shekel Bayo is mourning his death, that this is a painful process. The SPF does not wish to add to that pain by making unhelpful comments to the press. We're saddened that his legal representatives appear not to take the same approach. We're also saddened that his legal representatives are inferring police officers should not have the same legal protections as any other member of the public. A petite female officer responding to a call of a man brandishing a knife was subject to a violent and unprovoked attack by a large male. The officer believed she was going to die as a result of this assault. I very much regret that Mr. Bayo sadly lost his own life following this incident, but innuendo and speculation whilst the independent investigation is ongoing adds nothing other than to the pain and grief of the family. We make no apology for standing up for the rights of police officers, and we continue to extend to the family and friends of Mr. Bayo our sincere condolences. And I think when you gave your statement to the inquiry, you were shown that media release. We don't need to go to your statement, but for reference is paragraph 119. And you were asked if you recalled it, and you said, after the event, I do not remember being consulted in relation to any press release, but I am aware of the press release.
Yes.
So you knew about it. And what I would like to do now is take you to what was actually reported in the media following on the SPF issuing this release. Sorry. Can we go to AAC 00379, please? And page 7 of the PDF. And we see it recorded in the left-hand margin that this is an article from the Herald, dated the 15th of May of 2015. The heading is Custody Death Family, Tell Us the Truth and Let Us Grieve, followed by Lawyer Tells of Grave Concerns over Events Surrounding Tragedy. Now, if we could scroll down a little, please. If we stop there, please. And if we can look at the right-hand column above the words in bold, we see a repeat of the press release by the SPF that we looked at a moment ago. It's both above and below the text in bold. Do you see that there?
Yes.
If we go to a paragraph beneath the text in bold, the next complete paragraph that begins Peter Watson, do you see that?
Yes.
So we have the media release from the chairman of the SPF, and it's followed up with this. Peter Watson of PBW Law said, "While it is deeply regrettable that Mr. Bayo lost his life, I would ask the media and public to remember that a petite female officer was chased and then subjected to a violent and unprovoked attack by a very large man who punched, kicked and stamped on her. The officer believed she was about to be murdered, and I can say that but for the intervention of the other officers, that was the likely outcome." Have you seen that before?
Round about the time it came out, yes.
Were you, in fact, required to keep yourself appraised of media reporting on a daily basis as part of your responsibility as Flo?
Yeah, and it goes through Michael Tate, I think was our communications officer at the moment, so he was at every briefing, so he brought us up to speed. And everything was going on, so he was my, if you like, my point of contact in relation to media matters, and he would keep me aware of, the investigation as a whole, but I would be made aware of media releases.
Okay. We have a statement from Michael Tate, and he confirms that he took up his post as media manager on the 4th of June. Can you help me with who would have been acting in that role between Sheku Bayo's death and the 4th of June?
Not by name, no, but there was somebody there.
There was someone.
Christine, I think was her first name.
Okay.
I'm guessing there. I think that was him.
Don't worry, I'm sure we can find out. But was it the same process where would someone come along to briefings?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I remember Michael being there and keeping us updated, so I wasn't aware it was the 4th of June that he started, but there was corporate communications within, and I was kept up to speed in relation to press releases, paper cuttings and things like that.
Can we look briefly at an entry in your second logbook that relates, I think, to this coverage? So the second logbook is PIRC 04151, and it will be at page 11 of the PDF. So this is an entry, 10:04 hours on the 15th, call from Anwar questioning, Sorry, bear with me a second. I wonder if I have the wrong reference. Sorry. Can we scroll up a little, please? Oh no, I beg your pardon. It's the correct entry. I just had the wrong place in it. I'm so sorry. We were in the right place after all. If we can scroll down a little, because much of the content isn't relevant to the issues that I want to ask you about. 4 lines from the bottom. So this is in the context of a conversation that you're having with Mr. Anwar. He called shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning of the 15th. Commented on how the press coverage in the papers today, 15th, is not helpful. Peter Watson, police lawyer's statement in particular, is deeply unhelpful, and that of the Police Federation. Asked about a meeting, and then there's some other information that's not of direct relevance. Do you recall that conversation with Mr. Anwar?
Yes.
And what were the nature of the concerns that were being expressed?
Just that it wasn't helpful, the comments being made by Mr. Watson and the Police Federation. And I agreed that it was unhelpful rather.
If we can scroll on to the next page, please. And next again, I think there's a continuation of this conversation. Here we are. So at 13:48 hours, a phone call to Amar Anwar expressed our concerns regarding the press coverage. Our concerns have been discussed, but we do not want this situation to sidetrack the inquiry. We're concerned how the press have concentrated on the dispute between both solicitors and how this should not be allowed to distract the progress of the inquiry. So it would appear that the PIRC are also sharing their concerns
Yes.
around the reporting. Is that
Yes.
is that fair?
Yes.
And what was the nature of the concerns that the PIRC had?
Just as it stated there, that the exchange of words between Mr. Watson, the Federation, and Mr. Anwar, whilst obviously highlighting the inquiry into Sheku's death, it was a concern that it was a distraction. The important thing was that we were investigating the death of Sheku, and it was important that we continued. And language, terminology, etc., could be a distraction and could be unhelpful.
Can we go back to your second inquiry statement, please, to paragraph 121? You were asked about this entry in the flow log. I've been shown the flow log for 15th of May when in a phone call with Amar Anwar I expressed our concerns. Our concerns have been discussed, but we do not want this situation to sidetrack the inquiry. I've been asked what those concerns were in terms of coming from PIRC and those expressed by Amar Anwar. The row of the flow is at some point, whether it's just a few lines in the press or it generates some form of media interest, to explain to the family that we knew there would be high media interest in relation to this, and it's trying to ignore what has been said in the press, because if there are any major issues in relation to it, it is for us to decide what is relevant. If the family do read something in the press, then I would expect the family, or Amar Anwar on this occasion, to come to me as a single point of contact and inform me of any impact on the family. So you say here that it's your role to explain the family that you knew there would be high media interest, and it's trying to ignore what's been said in the press, and it's for you to decide what is relevant.
Relevant to the lines of inquiry, so you have it's to try and protect the family or allay any fears in relation to rumours and speculation. So that's the sort of context of that. There's, prior to social media, an example I can give you is that what we're dealing with a road death, which effectively was at the road end of the deceased's home address, despite the best efforts of myself and the flows to get that information to the family. A passing minister had recognised the car and had knocked on the door 2 minutes before we arrived to tell the husband that his wife had been killed in a road crash, and that was without social media. and that was just within 100 metres of the location. So with social media, it's trying to control that, it's trying to control what has been said in the press and what is accurate and what is not accurate and what is relevant to our investigation. So this, to me, this whole exchange between either parties, solicitors, federation, etc., it was not helpful, and it's trying to, and that's part of the sort of media strategy. When we have a media strategy and it's Crown directed, ourselves and Police Scotland, it's the Crown who decides what will be released in the media, and each party will put their information or their press release into the Crown, and the Crown will either agree to it or say it will be held if asked situation. So that's the control. The Federation, we as an organisation don't have any control of the Federation. As it says, they are there to represent their members, and that's their take on it. I don't remember the timeline, and I couldn't give a timeline in relation to that. It would have been helpful to know it was coming out. And I could at least then phone Amaranmar, and if I couldn't get him, I would have persisted to phone the farm and say, look, this is coming out and this is the content, as I would do with any situation in relation to the press, just to let you know this is coming out and this is what's been said or will be printed, and is it going to cause them any concern? And that's nothing to do with this particular situation. That's any press release that we would deal with, both within the police and within PIRC.
Thank you. I may have one or two more questions around this subject, but I'm mindful of the time, sir.
Yes, we'll stop now for lunch and sit at 2 o'clock.